Hi, welcome to another episode of EMDR with Alice. So we're continuing our series on EMDR and utilizing the enneagram to support the EMDR work that you're doing. So today I wanted to focus specifically on working with enneagram numbers 3, 7, and 8, which, as we talked about in the previous episode, these are numbers that their personality style is more future oriented. Their orientation to time is the future. These particular personality styles can be more aggressive, can be more assertive. They're also always thinking ahead, seem to have a lot more energy than other numbers on the Enneagram, and are just usually faster processors. They process information a lot quicker, make decisions quicker, make plans quicker. So I want to focus specifically on these three numbers today, and we can talk about treatment planning specifically with these three numbers of 3, 7, and 8. So as I previously mentioned, these three numbers process quicker, but their orientation to time, because it's more future oriented, you can often struggle with these particular personality styles because they have a hard time remembering the past. These are people that you typically will hear them say things like, the past is in the past. Like, I don't care. I don't need to care. I don't need to know. I forgot about that a long time ago. They maybe even just really have a hard time getting bought into getting to the root and working on those touchstone memories, because again, they're more concerned about what's happening now and in the future. And so that's their orientation. And so I find that if I can bring in facts about the science around why the things that are happening in their present are so active for them, is because they're linked in to earlier fuel sources. And we need to really find those those memories that they're linking into, and reduce the charge of those by processing those, so that it can reduce the charge and the impact of what's happening in their present life. So I spend some time doing the science and the psychoeducation around that, so that there's more of a buy-in of why we want to go to the past. Because if you don't do that, there tends to be some resistance about getting to those past things. Then the other barrier that you can run into when you're working specifically with these personality styles, again, of the Enneagram 3, 7, and 8, is they can have a hard time actually remembering the past and remembering memories. So when you get to target sequencing, they have a hard time getting there and identifying anything that does feel connected. Also, remembering these particular numbers have a hard time connecting with vulnerable emotions. They have different strategies in how they stay away from vulnerable emotions. So the 3 is typically going to reframe and be more goal-oriented and success-oriented, and paint kind of the situation in a positive light where they are represented more positively. The 7 is going to really kind of avoid any of those uncomfortable, vulnerable emotions, and they're going to reframe, do silver lining. They're going to do kind of positive metaphor. They may do storytelling, jokes. All of it is kind of more of an entertainment type fashion. And then an 8, the way that they kind of avoid that vulnerability might be to be more directive in the session, take charge, take control, and really, like, by the end of the session, there's been this battle of control the whole time. And if you're feeling any of those things with these particular numbers, what's really happening is they're working really hard not to get activated into those more vulnerable emotions that are actually stored in those earlier networks. And so we may spend some time talking about that as part of our prep work, identifying those go-to ways of managing that vulnerability for them, really explore that so we can normalize it, validate it, talk about how important and essential their ways of managing vulnerability and the fear of connecting into that vulnerability, how that's been essential in their life. Once we've done that, then we might be able to then move in and do some target sequencing, because now we have the science and the psychoeducation around why it's important to get into the history, And we've been able to really identify and normalize and recognize why their go-to ways of managing that distress have been really successful and helpful for them. Now, let's get into target sequencing. When target sequencing with these particular numbers on the Enneagram, they really may legitimately just have a hard time remembering. And maybe they don't necessarily have qualities of dissociation. You're not seeing evidence of that, or at least high levels of it. And so it's not that they blocked out the past. It's just that their go-to ways of managing their distress is to just not remember and focus more on the future. And so we may have to do more things like genograms, or even just let's do a timeline of just all the things, information you know that's been told to you about your family and your family history and your growing up years. And we might work in chunks. So I might say, tell me what you know about your life from birth to 5. Now tell me what you remember, what you know, and what's been told to you about your life from like age 5 up until like upper elementary. So say maybe 10. And then let's talk through what you know or remember about your life from age like 10 to 18, right? And so we may just kind of work through chunks and begin just identifying and seeing if kind of memories can kind of come forward in that way. Once I've done that, that doesn't mean I'm going to work through all of the memories that come up through that timeline work. What we'll do then is then do our target sequencing, and we have information now to pull from because we've pulled it forward just by doing an activity that's kind of brought it more to the surface. So we can then find the particular memories that seem to link in to a specific network that's impacting the present triggers that's in their life today. So again, I do the timeline not to identify all the memories I'm going to be working on. I'm not going to work on all the memories in the timeline. I do the timeline maybe with these particular clients because then it helps bring some of that information forward that they're having a hard time accessing. Then I can do my target sequencing where I work with my present and then get my negative cognition and then work backwards and finding the particular memories that feel linked or connected to that negative cognition. And if I need it, I have timeline information I can pull from to help the client identify those targets. So when working with this population, you may have to get a little bit creative when you're doing that, doing some more kind of creative type ways of history taking. Like I said, genograms, timelines, any stories that they've been told, that their families told them or talks about that they don't necessarily remember the details to. And we may identify all that before we actually do our target sequencing. And then I find that when working with these particular numbers, I just try to go as early as we can. And then I know as an EMDR therapist, the earliest we can get to, we start there. And I can trust the network system to take me earlier if it needs to go earlier. It'll come up in phase 4 if we have a feeder memory, and we just follow that if it seems to come up in phase 4. Otherwise, I start as early as I can get to with a client, and then it may process smoothly on through from there. But if there's a block, or I might hear some earlier kind of content coming through or associated memories, and if that happens, I just switch to that earlier memory and then continue processing from that earlier standpoint. So we try to get as early as we can in target sequencing, but we can't always do that, especially when we're working with these particular personality styles. And so we go with what we got, and we trust that the system will get us where we need to go as we get into it. I also will recognize and just note that because these 3 particular personality styles tend to move faster in life. They process quicker, they think quicker on their feet, they have comebacks quicker, they're real creative in their comebacks, that they're probably going to process target memories quicker. And so these particular clients are going to move through your sessions a lot faster and move through memories faster. You'll just have to keep an eye on some of those go-to ways that they already manage distress and make sure that they're not moving into those in ways of trying to kind of bypass the vulnerability in reprocessing. Well, that's a lot that we've talked about today, focusing on these particular 3 numbers on the Enneagram. Hope this was helpful, and I look forward to spending some more time on some other numbers in our next episode.